Thank you, everybody, for coming. My name is Dr. Ford. I teach history and humanities here at UMR. And I want to provide ever so briefly some context for the speakers for tonight. First of all, the theme is refugees, immigrants, and ethnic communities, a tale of three countries. What are those three countries? Well, it's primarily about Germany and Turkey. These students went on study abroad programs to those countries. And each country, they spent some time in three cities, in Turkey, in Istanbul, Bursa, Edirne, which all in turn were at one time capitals of the once glorious Ottoman Empire. And then the students who went to Germany went to Berlin, Munich, and Nuremberg. So ultimately they're going to be reporting in some fashion or another on their observations of what they saw when they were over there. And some of the talks have particular themes that have been developed based on interest in what they came across. Now, these global seminars, which is what we call these study abroad programs that they went on, three-week programs, the themes were somewhat similar between Turkey and Germany. For Turkey, it was to look at ethnic communities, ethno-religious communities, primarily in Istanbul, obviously looking at ethnic Turks, but also looking at the relationship between the Turkish community and Kurds, Jews, Greeks, Armenians, for example. The global seminar in Germany had a similar theme, but shifted context a little bit. And there, the students looked at the issue of immigrants, primarily the Turkish immigrants. They're the large minority in Germany, but also refugees. And we'll learn about some of these refugees. There are many refugees coming to Germany these days, but we kind of focused in on the refugees who are fleeing the conflict in the Middle East or southwestern Asia, particularly the Syrian war. So we're going to get different presentations based on these experiences. And then the final thing I want to say before we have our first speaker, and they'll pretty much introduce themselves, is the relevance of these topics, which might not be lost on some of you. We might be coming to this presentation with various degrees of knowledge about the topics tonight, but some of you might know, for example, that there's been what's been called the European Migrant Crisis, or basically a refugee crisis going on since about 2015, if not earlier, as a result of the Syrian conflict in the Middle East, other conflicts as well in Afghanistan and so forth. So Germany has become sort of the, if you will, the repository of many refugees coming in from those lands, and it has stirred a big controversy over this, what's been called, especially by critics, an open door policy. And maybe as you hear about some of these things, you can't help but think about how it relates or not to events in the United States, which maybe is that third country, a tale of three countries, really focusing on Turkey and Germany, but I think we can draw parallels, and maybe we want to know, how does this connect to the United States? And then the other relevancy here is, I was talking about Germany primarily there, Turkey, strategic partner in the world for the United States. However, there's been recent events there that have turned the government in a more autocratic, authoritarian direction than had been the case earlier. So, and that has consequences for geostrategic importance, among other things. So, that's a little bit on the relevance and maybe the overall context. But we'll start with our first speaker, Merritt. You can use that. Which one? Oh, you want me to do it?
Hello. It is on. I was told it was on. Sorry. Hi, everybody. So My name is Merritt Flurkey, and I went on the trip to Germany just this January. Yeah. So I'm going to talk to you about some of the tensions that have been building in Germany that we observed. So in 2015, the Chancellor, Angela Merkel, established an open door policy for immigrants that you might have heard about, allowing immigrants from many different countries, Syria, Turkey, to come in without necessarily a strong cap on how many there were, or regulations as to where they were, who they were coming, where they were coming from, and that kind of thing. And so that Germany's population was becoming more diverse in that year as they flowed in. And then right before we left for Germany, they had the Christmas market attacks that you probably heard about in December. And that led to quite a lot of critics calling out Angela Merkel for her open door policy, which brought in potential terroristic threats to Germany. And so we end up in Germany in January, and we're seeing each different kind of ethnicity and hearing stories about how they are going through experiencing traveling illegally, moving from country to country, trying to find safe refuge to land in. And what with this Christmas market attack, it led to a lot of backlash for fairly safe immigrants looking for a good home base to find a fresh start. And then, so Germany has been looking for a middle ground, and that has been through looking at integration versus multiculti, which is, multiculti is a bunch of cultures living together and acknowledging each other, and then integration is Germany saying you're going to live by our rules and suppress your own religion, race, ethnicity, cultural appreciations and pursuits and that kind of thing. And then you can. So this is us on our trip. We met with a Turkish, a cook who had spent many years in Jordan. And her perspective on our American politics was impressive to us because we saw, because she's been watching it. She's been keeping up with our politics consistently. And she's in full favor of our current president because she knows where he's coming from, and she is impressed with his honesty, is what she's had told us, which other presidents she hadn't seen from as much. Which was just really interesting to us to have an outsider's perspective on how it worked and what she thought she saw happening in America. And then the last day we were there, we had an anti-immigration protest in the street right outside our hotel. These people were peaceful. They didn't necessarily, as far as we know, they didn't attack anyone. There wasn't any there wasn't any conflict, but they were out and they were not happy. And there was the flags they're holding are neo-Nazi origin. And then this map, on the other hand, is just demonstrating the influx of immigrants versus anti-immigrant populations. The darker green are where the most people have come into without violence, without protests against immigrants, and the light green are where people haven't been coming in as much, but there has been a lot of protests. So it's just interesting to see that they don't necessarily, those who protest aren't necessarily exposed to the ideals and the beliefs of the normal immigrant coming into their country. And then moving forward, these violent attacks like the Christmas market have led to splintering in the political system. Current Chancellor Angela Merkel and her other Martin Schulz with the SPD are on the leftist side, and then there's the Alternative for Deutschland, which is the far right, and they're ever since the attacks have been increasing, they've stepped up their political campaigning and have gained a wider, more power in the political party. And in September, they do have an election to potentially get Angela Merkel out, potentially keep her back in, but moving forward, as the chancellor who put in the open door policy, these events will are going to have a strong influence as to what the political system looks like in Germany.
I didn't say this at the outset, but we can take questions sort of along the way after each individual speaker, and then at the end as well if there's any other questions. So, yes.
From your perspective, what problems are the Syrian people, especially since that seems to be the biggest element? Is it because they want to hang on to their culture? Is that why the German people or some German people are against this?
So you're asking why the German people are against the Syrians?
Yeah, or uncomfortable with the Syrian population being there.
So the young man who attacked on the day of the Christmas market was Tunisian. The Syrians bring with them a lot of political conflict, just being the chancellor in Syria, Bashar al-Assad, is connected with Russia politically for oil. So it's not necessarily Syrian immigrants themselves that are causing the problem. They're not violent. They're seeking asylum. They're not seeking to be this radical who attacked on Christmas. So it's not necessarily that each German is afraid of the Syrians. It's that the government doesn't know how to help them when working with other governments that are involved with Syria.
Maybe you could mention Ahmed as well.
Ahmed was a 20-year-old we met in Berlin. He escaped when he was 18 from Syria. He was a university student, but his university was bombed the day before he took his exams. So he had to illegally, either he was going to be drafted or he had to run away. And he ran because he also had an older brother in Berlin who had done the same thing. And he ran at 20 years old, and he has been making his way in Germany ever since. He does not speak German originally, but he now speaks German, English, and his native tongue. And he gives tours of hotspots for Syrians in Germany to people like our class, just to explain how hard it has been for him being on the run and not being and having to make a way for himself and that kind of thing. So it was very interesting to hear his story and realize how different life could be, because I know I'm going to graduate.
I just want to point out that this woman, a Syrian woman, she was sort of is the Rachel Ray. She has a cooking show of Syria, although her show was in Jordan. So that's someone who had her own show, and she had to flee, and she's trying to get established in Berlin.
Thank you very much.
Oh, some questions. Yes. want me to give him the mic? Okay.
Does Germany have any way for the Syrians to ultimately become German citizens, or are they destined to forever be, you know, non-citizens?
From what I saw, I believe Ahmed was working toward citizenship. I know he's working towards higher education. It's a long process, and just acclimating to the culture and getting yourself in, like applying for asylum and being able to integrate is very hard. And citizenship, especially with the discussion of capping immigration, is probably going to be harder now than it would have been a year ago. But I think they're moving towards that as slowly, as constantly as they can.
I have a question about the open door policy. What kind of assistance is the government providing for the refugees coming in?
The government is providing as much as it can, being under critique for its acceptance of immigrants has made that more of a challenge. But we talked to a lot of smaller groups who are keeping their eyes and ears open for ways to connect immigrants to the government and to their support systems. We saw a lot of firsthand testimony of people who had been through through hangars with rooms and showers and the basic necessities of life that had been set up by the government. So they're doing their utmost to make sure that these people can get a start. Special housing, it depends on how you can connect to people and how much access you have, how many people are where you are, and how many people you have getting into the system. So special housing, yes, but it can be tricky just based on population and location and that kind of thing.
Yes, ma'am, I've got a very simple question, and it's very short. You mentioned something about integration in a state of multiple culture. So Germany now is working towards that goal, integration. That's what...
I'm sorry?
They're working towards that goal.
In the way I used it, integration is a little, they're not crazy about the word integration, being that it sets aside the culture that they had a little more than the term multiculti might. Integration means being as German as you can.
Yes.
Which the immigrants themselves, as I saw it, didn't necessarily want that. They were working to get education. They could speak English. The ones we talked to spoke English. They were working towards educating themselves and that kind of thing. But they didn't want to be purely German in that sense, purely integrated. We asked Ahmed if he was happy here, and he didn't really want to give an answer based on the fact that it's not home, and he can't pursue his beliefs in the same way.
Okay, good. You have answered my question then. Okay.
Thank you.
Just to follow up on that a little bit, though, that the German government provides housing and health care to the asylum seekers coming in. It's a big process. This Ahmed, 20-year-old, talked to us about it, for example, where you might come in, and Merritt mentioned there's an airport, and they're an old airport, historic airport, and they're using the hangars to build all these little compartments for sort of the initial process. And then at some point you'll go to a forgot what they call it, but some basic sort of government housing. And then if you're really lucky, you can get an apartment. And Ahmed was trying to go right to the apartment option and get a job and learn German. So, okay, go ahead.
Hello? Working? Are we good? Okay. I'm spoiling this one. Oh, here we go.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Rob. I can use that one if I need to. Hello? Good? Test? There we go. Better. Okay. All happy cities are alike, but all unhappy cities are unhappy in their own way, to paraphrase a great Russian author. A great Turkish author, who you will get to know in this presentation, articulates the peculiar unhappiness of his home city of Istanbul in one word, huzun. It means melancholy in Turkish. Orhan Pamuk is the writer Istanbulus look to understand the source of their confusion and unhappiness in their city. When Pamuk isn't publishing novels to great literary acclaim, he speaks the truth and gets in trouble. Some years ago, he made an off-the-cuff remark to a Swiss newspaper stating accurately that 1 million Armenians and 30,000 Kurds have been killed in this country, and he's the only one who dares to talk about it. Pamuk received death threats and was prosecuted by the state for his remarks on the charge of public denigration of Turkish identity.
Maybe use this mic.
Sure.
Say that bit.
Okay. This one?
Yeah.
Hello? Okay. Okay, to return. Some years ago, he made an off-the-cuff remark to a Swiss newspaper stating accurately that 1 million Armenians and 30,000 Kurds have been killed in this country, and he's the only one who dares to talk about it. Pamuk received death threats and was prosecuted by the state for his remarks on the charge of public denigration of Turkish identity. It may be challenging for us Americans to see any huzun, any melancholy in the authoritarian impulse to silence one's critics. To a citizen of a liberal democracy like ours, there wouldn't seem to be any emotion present in this disagreement between Pamuk and the Turkish government except fear. But our country's past is similarly tarnished by genocide and the systematic oppression of a whole population of people. So who among us isn't torn between the need to atone and repent for our national atrocities and to celebrate our democracy for its realizations of the highest human strivings? Who among us can really say that our relationship to our country and our national identity is not one of profound ambivalence, that it is not a strange and caustic amalgam of guilt and pride, openness and prejudice, glory and despair? And that is huzun.
Visual story, right?
To try to record the whole vision pure would be absurd. After all, my friend Pamuk is talking about the huzun of an entire city, an entire imperial city that was once the seat of empires. I, the one who visits, and the one who returns, I try to train my eyes to apprehend this harsh mystery. Stamped on these lifeless things, Ottoman relics, Byzantine ruins, is Mustafa Kemal, modern man. He sleeps in every city and gazes at every gawker, a city of 14 million passengers who spend their ride in sadness, overshadowed by all that came before. In this cosmic place, what room is there for persecution and hate? Sometimes I think, in all its feverish glory, that is all that remains. Beneath the ancient tombs and modern marvels, shattered skeletons lay crushed by the unstoppable force of civil society and modern civilization. eye for an eye, PKK for the MIT, war in the southeast for development and prosperity, tear gas in Raqqa for the destruction of Gezi Parka, my Turkish blood for your Kurdish shame, 500,000 dead in Gallipoli, endless arguments over Cyprus, Kurdish spilled blood for what? And everywhere, the extinguished souls of Armenian innocents. Why so much death? In what perverse market did the merchant foresee a fortune in bartering a holocaust? The economy of his heinous trade today is only debated by a whisper, and the money follows. And we wander through the shallow rhythm of the streets, looking down for shame and caution. Uzun, rendered meticulously on all faces, its chiseling so abrasive, so sinful is this city that idleness is celebrated.
Apparently I was so tired at that point that I just didn't put a fade out or anything in the video, just cut it off. So I hope that you got the sense from that video of a general feeling I had while I was in Turkey that I was trying to document, which is one of aimlessness and awe. How do you even begin to appreciate this huge transcontinental cosmopolis with all its relics and history? I felt alone and at the same time connected to something vast and ancient that was beyond my understanding. There's a long history of the poetic exploration of huzun as the feeling of spiritual anguish one feels when they are not close enough to Allah. In one sense, huzun is what you feel when you have involved yourself in too many worldly and material concerns and thus distanced yourself from Allah. In the other, it is the feeling that whatever the magnitude of your commitment to Allah, it is never enough. One can never suffer enough. One can never be connected deeply enough to Allah. Huzun first appears in the Quran as the Prophet Muhammad is describing this sense of spiritual anguish he feels after the death of his wife and uncle. Sinatal Huzun, the year of melancholy. It's produced by the deep spiritual loss of his family. There's a long history of this word being used and examined in Islamic texts and scholarship, but we won't go into that here. I want to talk about, as Pamuk says, the huzun of an entire city. My quote didn't work. That's okay. And that city is Istanbul, once the seat of great empires, a city that is literally divided between east and west by the Bosphorus Strait. And the spiritual anguish I want to talk about is not one precipitated by the loss of loved ones, but the loss of tradition, culture, and identity. This is the huzun of what we'll call top-down modernization. This is Mustafa Kemal Ataturk, founder of the Republic of Turkey. And there's a theory of history called the Great Man theory that posits that major events in world history are affected by one great man at a time. We obviously know it's much more nuanced and complicated than that, but if there ever was such a man who embodied this theory, it is Mustafa Kemal Ataturk. He reformed a country that was once the Ottoman Empire, ruled by sultans and caliphs, and he turned it into a liberal democracy, a secular one, one that is completely in alignment with Western ideals of liberalism. And this was not revolutionary grassroots organizing. It didn't come from the bottom, from the masses, from the commons. It came from the top. It was imposed, coerced on the population of Turkey. And his reforms changed every sphere of public life in significant ways. Agriculture, industry, finance, equal rights for women, and a complete overhaul of the Turkish language and literacy education. Ataturk's reforms replaced Arabic script in the Turkish language with Latin script, like we use in English. And he eliminated thousands of Arabic and Persian words from the lexicon. Even time and one's sense of it was altered by this rapid modernization, for clock towers were introduced into Turkey for the first time, where before people just used the call to prayer to organize their day. And perhaps most controversially, as illustrated by this quote, the reforms aimed to secularize society as Western governments did, and so women were prohibited from wearing hijab in public. Where Ataturk departs from Western models of liberal democracy is in establishing the military as the vanguard of progressive secularism. There have been several times in the history of Turkey when they have intervened with force to overthrow an overly theocratic state. One such coup happened last year. So here's our great man, Napoleon. You can compare him to Mustafa Kemal. And here's a quote from Pamuk describing the kind of psychic distortions that happen when your country is suddenly changed before your eyes. In Istanbul, the remains of a glorious past civilization are everywhere visible. No matter how ill-kept, no matter how neglected or hemmed in they are by concrete monstrosities, the great mosques and other monuments of the city, as well as the lesser detritus of empire in every side street and corner, the little arches, fountains, and neighborhood mosques, inflict heartache on all who live among them. And we must always, end quote. And we must always remember that this city's fall from grace was accompanied by a massive genocide of Armenians, 1 million, as Pamuk reminds us. This is the indelible truth that is unfortunately forbidden to speak of in Turkey. Huzun, as Pamuk says, is a way of looking at life that implicates us all. It is as life-affirming as it is life-negating. It can sow the seeds of confusion, fear, violence, even genocide, or it can lead us to spiritual peace. We are all implicated in the collective outcome of our individual huzun. You don't need to look any further than the homicidal protagonist of Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment to get a sense of the psychic distortions that one can experience as a citizen of a country, an underdeveloped society modernized from top to bottom. There's a horrible confusion one feels when their once solid society melts into air before their eyes, and suddenly the city, the country, the government, the culture that was once familiar has become strange. There's a dissonance begging for resolution, a gap that must be bridged, and it is in this paralyzing confusion that we find the huzun of an entire city. Modern men and women are under pressure to take one of two radically different approaches to these unpleasant feelings inside them. They may reach out toward the most open and generous inclusiveness, or they may plunge into the most rigid and violent exclusions. We know which one Dostoevsky's axe-wielding hero takes. So what does the other, more inclusive and open way look like? And Pamuk gives us an excellent picture of open modernist liberalism in the hero of his political novel, Snow. The protagonist is a poet named Ka, who returns from his political asylum in Germany to document a wave of religious suicides among teenage girls in a small border city in Turkey. That city is called Kars. Ka is the name of the main character, and Kar is the name of the book. A military coup is underway when Ka arrives, and he finds himself in the middle of a struggle between secularism and political Islam, kind of the defining conflict in the history of Turkey. And a blizzard traps all the inhabitants of Kars in the city for 3 days, which Ka spends wandering through this icy labyrinth, writing poems and bearing witness to the political intrigue taking place in the town. Ka's openness leaves him susceptible to persuasion, which we see when he drunkenly kisses the hand of the Muslim sheikh, despite proclaiming his atheism earlier that day. Although we may find Ka's politics admirable, his aimlessness and confusion are not so attractive. Ka finds his foil in Blue. Blue is the leader of a militant Islamist movement in Kars. Blue chooses the second way, that of violent terror, religious nationalism, and hatred of all things modern. Blue is a charismatic demagogue who motivates young men in the town to militant Islamism with impassioned rants against the West. Democracy, freedom, human rights don't matter in the West, he says. All the West wants is for the rest of the world to imitate them, like monkeys. There is only one West and one Western point of view, and we take the opposite view. End quote. We, to Blue, can mean anyone. People are interchangeable, as he demonstrates in his willingness to martyr young men and be sexually promiscuous with as many young women as he chooses. Ka's position is that the West and its placement of value on human diversity opens the way for a way of modern living that is more inclusive than Blue's and places more value on human life. They don't live that way in the West, he says. It's not as it is here. They don't want everyone thinking alike. Everyone, even the most ordinary grocer, boasts of having his own personal views. Ka sees this most ordinary grocer, who can have any opinion he wants, as a monumental world historical achievement, one that is achieved by the liberal democracy we enjoy today. William Butler Yeats concisely describes their conflict in his poem, The Second Coming. The best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity. Ka dreams of returning to Germany with his love interest, Ipek, who is eventually on board to run away with Ka. But why should a smart, soulful, modern Turkish woman dream of moving to Germany? Both countries share a genocidal past, but Germany has made extraordinary efforts to commemorate the victims of its Holocaust, make reparations, and educate its population about the inexplicable horrors of genocide. With regards to its genocide of Armenians and continued oppression of Kurds, Turkey is, to borrow the language of Alcoholics Anonymous, in denial. Germany's response to the Holocaust has been an opening of the way, an opening of the way, a broadening of thought that has managed to absorb the horrors of its fascist past while forming a liberal democracy in its wake. The United States and Turkey, in their long histories and contemporary moments of authoritarianism, show an alarming response to their own confusion, their own collective huzun, that is in many ways a pivot away from liberal democratic ideals, the ones they were founded on. Recep Tayyip Erdogan rose to power on a nationalist Islamist platform and has since escalated the government's conflict with the Kurds, imprisoned thousands of civil servants and journalists, and most recently, in the election that happened last week, consolidated a dangerous amount of power in the executive office, leaning toward more autocratic governance. He would be very, very unhappy if he knew this picture was being shown right now. And here we are. This is a lovely picture of our President of the United States. We elected a narcissistic demagogue, confidence man, racist, misogynist, professionally and temperamentally unqualified reality television star to the highest office in the land. He rose to political prominence with a racist attempt to question Barack Obama's citizenship, and he ran a campaign full of violent contempt for immigrants, Muslims, people of color, and just about everybody. And he promised a top-down reform of Washington, a dismantling of the global elite power structure, a remaking of everything, and making America great again. It seems that millions of Americans feel that their country is becoming unfamiliar to them, whether it be the election and re-election of a black president, demographic change, immigration, or economic disenfranchisement. All of us in the modern world feel this in some way. We all inhabit a society full of contradictions, knowingly or not. You can't think for very long about democracy or freedom and what these things mean without encountering problems, questions that have no easy answers. Modern life has a way of intensifying the huzun within us as we all grapple with the abstracts of ideology and policy while navigating their material consequences in everyday life. As these worlds change and become less familiar to us, that is when we feel huzun. To quote Pamuk, "Now we start to understand Huzun as an isolating melancholy that compels those who feel it into solitude, but on the same token, it binds all in the city in a shared communal suffering. Pamuk's Huzun is a study in contradictions. It is both an ascetic solitude that frees us of material concerns and brings us closer to God, and the dark territory of melancholy and grief that tugs us farther and farther from spiritual peace. For those of us who choose the broad and open way, the inclusive response to Huzun, we have the existential task before us of both defining exactly what this means and assimilating the violent forces that seek to destroy it. We must be willing, as Hegel put it, to look the negative in the face. At the very least, we can all come together and commiserate in the suffering we all share. Thank you."
We have time for a couple of questions. Maybe put the slide on something else, Ataturk or Pamuk or something. So if you had any questions on Orhan Pamuk, the famed Turkish novelist, or Turkey in general.
My question is about the Turks. The Turks some are from Syria. The ones from Iraq are the same as the ones from central Turkey, but they were divided after the First World War. And also the PKK, another Kurdish group, are from Turkey. Now, refugees are prepared to return to someplace. What are the countries in Europe doing to help the refugees, the Kurds, return? And my second question is, the Kurds in Turkey. Now, the Kurds have always been allies of the United States, and the Turkish people have a very large United States airport, which is very important to the United States. And so supposedly there are allies too. The PKK has been, harassing isn't the term, but they don't get along with the administration in Turkey, which is probably an understatement. What's being done? What is the United States doing about this?
I confess I know very little about United States foreign
Rob
policy.
might be able to weigh in somewhat on the Kurds, but also one of our speakers is going to address the Kurdish issue full on, so we'll come back to it in a bigger way.
Yeah, that's about all I got. There is an autonomous region in Iraq, Syria, Turkey, across those countries, Kurdistan, where Kurds do have much more political autonomy than they enjoy in Turkey, but they've been a strong ally in the Syrian civil war for the United States in the fight against ISIS as well. That's all I got.
We'll come back to it. Maybe one more question, or not? We'll have time at the end too. Okay, let's give it up for Rob.
Hello, can you guys hear me? Okay, my name is Fozia. I went to the winter break trip in 2015 to Turkey in a class called Culture, Politics, and Religion, and a focus on ethnic minorities in Turkey. So we focused on the Kurds, Armenians, and the Greeks. So today I'm going to be talking to you guys about the Kurds. A show of hands, does anybody know who Kurdish people are or what Kurdistan is? Okay, so very few people, so this is kind of a history lesson. So historically, there was no country called Kurdistan, but it's a geocultural region where Kurdish people had a prominent population. The contemporary name for Kurdistan refers to the 4 parts that Kurdish people inhabit, which is on this map. southeastern Turkey, northern Iraq, northern Syria, and northwestern Iran. Kurds in Turkey comprise about 15 to 25% of the population. That's roughly 12 to 22.5 million people. 5 to 10% in Iran, 15 to 25% in Iraq, 10 to 15% in Syria, and also the diaspora is spread around the world, majority in Europe and a lot in Germany. So the total is around 30 to 37 million worldwide, so it would make sense for them to have an autonomous region because they're their own ethnic group. So after the Ottoman Empire collapsed at the beginning of the 20th century, new states were created in the Middle East like Iraq and Syria, but not a separate Kurdistan. Kurds do not have a state recognized by international law. They are the largest stateless ethnic group, straddling 4 states, which is pictured above. The Kurds, the reason why they don't have a state currently is because they were sold out by the Sykes-Picot agreement between the UK and France during the World War I, which was basically a disastrous attempt to impose Western colonialism on a heterogeneous population. After World War I, there was also the Treaty of Severus between the Allied powers and the Ottoman Empire. There was supposed to be Turkish land that was given to the Kurds. However, this was a much smaller piece of land, and it wouldn't accommodate for all the Kurds that were that ended up in British-occupied Iraq or French-occupied Syria. But at the very least, they would have their own homeland that they could live in. However, before the treaty could be ratified, Mustafa Kemal Ataturk, which Rob talked about, his army won the War of Turkey's independence, and so he didn't want to give up the land that he considered rightfully his, which could be argued. So the treaty was renegotiated to the Treaty of Lausanne, with borders already set up for Iraq and Syria, and nothing left for the Kurds. So the Kurds, they were sold out by the Sykes-Picot agreement, and Mustafa Kemal Ataturk didn't want to give up that land, so they ended up being stateless since 1923. The Kurds have their own language and culture and tradition, so it makes sense for them to have a land, but they don't. The majority of them are Muslim, Sunni, and there's also Shia Muslims in Iraq and Iran. Because the Kurds have remained a separate ethnic group, they have always sought autonomy and independence. These aspirations have resulted in almost continuous conflict and a history of repression, resilience, and reinvention in the face of existential threats by Turks, Arabs, and Iranians. The next slide. Yeah. Since the establishment of the Republic of Turkey in 1923, there have been massacres against Kurds, such as the Dersim Rebellion and the Zilan Massacre. They were categorized as mountain Turks, not even their name Kurds, by the Turkish government until 1991, and the words Kurd, Kurdish, and Kurdistan were officially banned by the government. Since lifting the ban in 1991, the Kurdish population in Turkey has long sought to have the Kurdish religion included in instruction in public schools. Following the military coup of 1980, the Kurdish language was officially prohibited in public and private life. And many people who spoke Kurdish, sang or published it in media were arrested and imprisoned. They are still not allowed to get a primary education in their mother tongue, and they still don't have a right to self-determination. There's also this process called Turkification, when the modern Republic of Turkey was founded in 1923. Secularism and nationalism were the two founding principles by Mustafa Kemal Ataturk, who was the founder of the Republic of Turkey. He aimed to create a nation state from the Turkish remnants of the Ottoman Empire. One of the goals was to ensure the domination of Turkish ethnic identity in every aspect of social life, in law, education, trade, civil law, and basically in the streets you can only speak Turkish. The process of unification through Turkification continued within modern Turkey, with policies like Citizens Speak Turkish, which was an initiative sponsored by the Turkish government to put pressure on non-Turkish speakers to speak Turkish in the 1930s. There was also the surname law, which was a law that forbade certain surnames from foreign cultures. As a result, many Kurds, Armenians, and Greeks had to adapt to Turkish renditions of surnames. There's also geographical name changes. Cities that were considered foreign that had Greek or Armenian names were changed to Turkish ones. The political representation of Kurds, is that they have some representation in government, but not a lot of power. The PKK is the Kurdistan Workers' Party, which was started as a guerrilla insurgency against the Turkish Republic in 1984, and it continued to be violent until the last ceasefire in 1999. Turkey's military allies like the US, the EU, and NATO see the PKK as a terrorist party, while the UN, Russia, and China and Switzerland have refused to add the PKK to their list. They're fighting for a nation state, just like, well, they're physically fighting, but just like most Kurds in all of those respective countries they want their own nation state, basically. So that is my brief history on Kurds. And also my experience in Turkey as it would probably be completely different to a lot of people in here because I'm black and I'm Muslim and I'm a woman and I have all these different identities that would be different to a lot of you in here. So since Turkey's a Muslim country, I felt very welcome there. So should I talk about my... Okay, on my flight, well, going there was probably the only time that I felt like incredibly uncomfortable was because I was stopped right before my flight was leaving for like 20 minutes, questioned by TSA about like, oh, what are you gonna do over there? Even though my professor, like Dr. James, was standing right there, TSA was questioning me for like 20 whole minutes about, hey, what are you doing in Turkey? And they got the names of my school, like my family's names, where they work, their phone numbers. Yeah, so it was kind of crazy. But in Turkey, it was a little uncomfortable because I am black and there's the culture there, everybody's like non-black, so it's very rare to see someone who is of darker complexion. But I didn't feel any overt racism or anything. It was mostly like curiosity because you're in a different culture and they don't see people like you, so they're going to ask questions or they're going to like ask where you're from and stuff like that. But all in all, like, I felt very welcomed in Turkey. When I did talk to Turkish people about Kurds or kind of mentioned it, they had like a lot of, at least the interactions I've had was very negative. Like, they didn't have a lot of nice things to say about Kurds. But I wouldn't say that's for the whole population. That's just maybe a minority few. Although there have been maybe hate crimes against Kurdish people that I read in articles and stuff online. Yeah, I don't really know what kind of questions you guys have, but if you have any about my experience or about Kurds in general, you can feel free to ask.
Does anybody have any questions?
Yes. Are you aware of any of the principal countries that are involved, Syria, Turkey, so forth, that's more amenable to giving the Kurds a nation state? Or is everybody kind of against doing that?
I know most all of them are kind of against it because they don't want to give up their land that they think is theirs. But Iran is kind of leaning towards giving them more of an autonomous, like a sovereign area for them. They do have their own governance in Iran, but they're still under the Iranian government. But I know Turkey for sure doesn't want to budge.
Does anybody up here have any questions about Kurds? Just thought I would ask.
I just wanted to say about the Kurds. In Iraq, the most valuable land as far as oil and other minerals, mostly oil, was concerned was the land occupied by the Kurds. And that's the same group as in Turkey, and I think there are valuable minerals in Turkey too. That's one reason the Kurds don't want to relocate, or they do. Those in Germany and others supposedly would want to return to the Middle East. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I was reading online that there was oil that was found there, but previously, or like historically, the reason they didn't want to give it up was because they didn't want to give up land. Like most countries just don't want to give up pieces of their land to another country, but that oil is a huge factor in it as well.
Did you encounter any Kurds while you were over there that you were able to get kind of a first-hand account of how life is for them?
Yeah, for me, I couldn't really tell the difference between who was Kurdish and who was Turkish, but if I did have conversations with them, they would tell me, oh, no, I'm not Turkish, I'm Kurdish. They live a life just like everybody else. At least the Kurdish people I've spoken to, they don't feel any animosity from Turkish people. Maybe if they mention that they want their own autonomous, like sovereign state, Turkish people might be like, what? No, or you do not feel comfortable here, but you live in Turkey. But from my experiences, I haven't met any Kurdish people that have felt any negative feelings from Turkish people.
This process of Turkification, so that means that those Kurdish people, they kind of, their identity, their cultural identity is completely erased because of this Turkification.
It was an attempt to make them get rid of their Kurdish language, and it only lasted for a couple of years, so it didn't really affect them that much. But it was an attempt by the Mustafa Kemal to create nationalism in Turkey and create a unified identity for everybody.
So when you say that they want a nation, so then how do they keep on celebrating their cultural identity? You know, keep on validating themselves that they are Kurdish?
I think it's because they have their own unique language and at their own ethnic group. So, and their own traditions and everything, they tend to stick together as opposed to like mingling.
So the language is kind of the only thing, no festivities, no cultural festivals?
I'm not, I know their culture is different from, it's similar to Persians and Iranians basically, but they have their own culture and traditions. So the language was a huge part of their identity, and it was an attempt by Mustafa Kemal to kind of squash all of their sense of nationalism, but they still spoke it in private life. And the ban didn't last very long, so it didn't really make a huge impact on them.
And if you were to go to the eastern part of Turkey or Anatolia, Diyarbakir, for example, a city in Turkey, that's almost considered the sort of the capital of the Kurds unofficially. And you would see some differences. They're Sunni Muslim, like the Turks, for the most part, so they have that in common. But there are some, the food and some of the costumes during their festivals are different. I don't know the details of that, though. And back to the oil is a big issue. Some of you might know in the news, ongoing, the conflict there, the battle for Mosul, for example, which is if you will, the major city of northern Iraq, which is an area rich in oil deposits, and that's Kurdish territory.
Any more questions?
Okay.
Okay, ma'am, you said you talked to some Kurds. Did you ever ask them whether they are interested to get their own, to separate from Turkey, to form their own nation?
There were a few people that did want to have their own nation, but then others were like indifferent. They were content with living in Turkey as opposed to other people, but I don't think like they would say it overtly that they wanted their own sovereign state, especially to someone like me who was a foreigner in their country, in Turkey. I don't think they would want to share that.
But the language is a big issue.
Yeah.
A loose parallel, let's say efforts to make Spanish in this country an official language in addition to English, that's a loose parallel to what Kurds would want in the Republic of Turkey, since they're the largest minority of about 15 million plus, and they want their language, among other things. But that's the big issue, their language recognized officially by the state. Okay, thank you very much. Cozy.
Hi, I'm Anqi. Last winter break, I went to Germany, taking a course about the refugee and immigrant issues. And before I went to Germany, I thought it's a very typical European country, and like the lovely streets and historical architectures, stuff like that. And in my opinion, it's a very like traditional Western countries. However, after I've been to it, I feel like it is much more diverse than that I thought. And everybody knows the Holocaust of the Jewish people during the World War II, and it has changed a lot of the Germany until today. And because of the dark history of the Holocaust, it has been shaping its way on the refugees and immigrants to some extent as well. And also on the contemporary time, more and more people have started to immigrate to the Germany. Not only the refugees, but also some Jewish people. They have gone back to Germany as well and trying to find a position or start a new life. So I would like to share my digital stories about the Jewish community.
Throughout history, there has been a lot of Jewish persecutions, and even now, Jews still exist as an oppressed community in the modern day. Jews faced destruction after destruction at the hands of enemies. First came the Babylonians. The picture shows the Ashtar when I was in a museum in Berlin. Then the Persians, then the Greeks, and finally, with all their fury, the Romans, who forced them into exile and dispersion. For over 2,500 years, Jews suffered persecution, especially the Holocaust during the World War II. As is known to all, 6 million Jews were killed by the Nazis and their collaborators, which is the most miserable page in the history of the Jews. And this is a concentration camp outside of Berlin that I visited. Throughout their history, and even until the modern times, people believe their ills on a convenient scapegoat. The reason is complex, and it involves historic, religious, ethnic, political, economic issues. This picture was taken on March 10, 1933. I learned about him when I was in Munich. This Jewish lawyer went to the police office asking for securing the release of a client. What ridiculous was that the police forced him to, "I'm a Jew. I will never again complain to the police." Jews have faced and continue to face the demonic and destructive forces of anti-Semitism. They were scattered across the globe like stubble in the wind. Israel is one of the places where Jews originally come from. However, in recent decades, many Jews have come back to Germany. Why? I had asked a Jewish woman before. Her answer was that the living cost in Israel is too high to afford, and the social welfare is not as good as that in Europe. But mostly, she still considers Germany her home country, like many other Jews who lived there long before Hitler. Jews were driven out of their homes in country after country. But despite the persecutions and even the unimaginable destruction of the Holocaust, they have maintained their strong and firm faith. And Jews have never let go of their dream of returning to their homeland. I visited the memorial to the murdered Jews of Europe, which is located at East Berlin, and the courtroom in Nuremberg where Nazi leaders were convicted. I feel like most Germans today recognize their country's dark past and reach out to the Jewish community. I'd been to a Jewish community meal, a Shabbat dinner, and I would say it's really a tiny community. However, there were security guards wearing bulletproof clothing and checking our passport carefully before we went inside, where the atmosphere was much different. I wondered why. A Jewish guy from Poland told me there is a tense relationship between Jews and Muslims because of religious and historical issues. And Muslims face their own discrimination in Germany. However, in a similar ironic twist of history, after the Nazis were defeated in 1945, in the summer of 2015, Germany launched an open-door policy for the refugees from the other countries. However, by preserving their religion and culture, Jews have not only survived, but also flourished many efforts to wipe them from history.
Yeah, I remember once married said to me the Jewish people's value is hard for people to understand, but easy for people to judge. For example, Jewish people eat kosher, and kosher actually is an ancient way to keep food fresh. And Jews treat their body as a temple reflecting to God. And keeping healthy and eating clean food shows their respect for their religion and their life. But actually, back that time, a lot of people just feel like they are so different from other people. They are the outsiders, or they are always very arrogant, things like that. And I always very curious about why Jewish people are persecuted by so many people from different countries throughout the history. So I did some research about this question, and the historians classified six explanations about this question. And the first one is from the economic perspective. And people said we hate Jews because they possess too much wealth and power. Like back to the before the World War II, many Jews worked at the bank or similar position. So people always had a stereotype, which was that you control the money. And the second one is chosen people. We hate Jews because they arrogantly claim that they are the chosen people. And the scapegoat theory, Jews are a convenient group to single out and blame for our troubles. And the scapegoating of Jews has been a widespread phenomenon for over 2,000 years. And the decide theory, we hate Jews because they killed Jesus. And also some people said we hate Jews because they are different than us, which is similar to what I mentioned. They eat kosher and they wear their religious clothes, and you can very easy to recognize they are Jewish or not. Just don't like people from the other religions. And the last one is the racial theory. We hate Jews because they are an inferior race. But actually, I think each one doesn't make perfect sense. So there are also some the contradictions to against those explanations and reasons. For the first one, the Jews of 17th through 20th century, Poland and Russia, they were dirt poor, but they were still hated by people. And the chosen people, in the late 19th century, German Jews denied the chosenness and walked on assimilation. And for the scapegoat, any group must already be hated to be an effective scapegoat, which means it's not the scapegoat theory caused the anti-Semitism. So I think it is the anti-Semitism makes the Jewish people a convenient scapegoat as a target. And the decide, that one is related to the Christian and the Jewish, some religious issues. But the Christian Bible said that Romans killed Jesus, and the Jews are accomplices. But however, these accomplices were persecuted by like 2,000 years. And the next one, the outsider theory. In late 18th century, Jews still were hated by people because their assimilation. And people just said, we hate you, not because you are different. It is because you are trying to become us. So we won't let you infect our race because you are an inferior race. But this one leads to the last one. Actually, Jews are not a race. Everybody can become a Jew, no matter what color and race. But I think that so there's not a strong argument or the standard answer for this question, but think that like every millisecond of that things happen to us, whether we see good or bad, it just has its own purpose. Like when you pick up a jigsaw puzzle, it doesn't make a lot of sense, but you put them together, it makes picture as a whole, just like the history. So I would like to end up with a quote by Elie Wiesel. He's an American Jewish writer, and he's also a survivor from the Holocaust. And he said, in Jewish history, there are no coincidences. Thanks.
Any questions? Anji. Yes.
It's not a subject I'm very knowledgeable about, but I was under the impression that the Jews that were migrating to Germany in the decades after World War II were from Russia and from behind the Iron Curtain. You said that they were returning. Is that, where would they be returning from?
I think after the war, you mean after the World War II, there are a group of Jewish people persecuted to other country, and after that, where did they returning from? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, like what countries are the Jews coming from who are returning to Germany in the last few decades, say?
Yeah, I think after the World War II, a lot of Jews were persecuted to different countries. Like some of them back to the Israel, and some of I know a very large number of Jewish came to the U.S. Yeah, but I think for the people who were willing to back to Germany, they might like live there for a lot of generations with their families. I mean, because they just treat Germany as their home country. But people back to Germany after the World War II, they might return from different countries.
You're right, though. A number of Jews are coming from the Eastern Bloc and Russia after the fall in the early 90s. Yes. Well, more recently, there are descendants of Holocaust survivors who are returning. There's an incentive for them to do so by the other generations, yes. And some of them are Israelis, and some are just Jewish folks living in other countries. Mm-hmm. Well, we saw a little of this. Anji mentioned a Shabbat dinner that we partook of, and the rabbi, for example, was from Poland, and his family were survivors of the Holocaust, for example. Any other questions? Otherwise, we can open up the time remaining to the panel.
Yes, ma'am. Can you tell us about anti-Semitism in Germany? How much is it there?
How many?
How strong is it?
I think in recent years, the anti-Semitism is not that strong in Germany anymore. Because I think, as I mentioned, because of the dark past of the Holocaust, it has been shaping their policies on the immigrants and refugees, and some of them have already realized they did very bad things. And also, I think since the open door policy exists in Germany, there wouldn't be very strong anti-Semitism in Germany so far.
Overall, it's not, Germany's made a lot of progress, and Jews in Germany face some persecution here and there, sometimes from other immigrant communities and also from the German right-wing groups. However, those are, in both cases, small minorities. Okay, if you want to have a seat here, we have 5 minutes. I don't know if anyone has any lingering questions, something you're dying to know from one of our speakers about Istanbul or Berlin or Orhan Pamuk or refugees. About whom? Oh, Greeks. Her focus is more on the Kurds. I don't know. Does anyone want to weigh in on the Greeks?
I don't know a lot about the Greeks, to be honest. I've only done research on Kurds, and those are the people I've interacted with in Turkey, so I'm not.
That's a good question, though, because when we were in Turkey, that's one of the communities we looked at. And how did we look at the Greek community? We went to some of the old Greek neighborhoods that are still in existence. And we also had a guest speaker come in when we were in Istanbul who is a professor from Greece teaching at a Turkish university, and he gave sort of the perspective of the Greek community. It's similar to the Armenian community in Istanbul, which is a Christian minority as well, and traditionally or historically they've been scapegoated or persecuted against. And so there is, when we talk to these representatives of the Greek and Armenian communities, they had a perspective on that. Basically, things aren't like the way they used to be, but they are treated sometimes as a minority, and they can feel that. Yes. Long-standing. Yes. We had a diverse group, and did any of the locals in Turkey or Germany, I would say especially Turkey, have any comments about that?
Like I mentioned earlier, my experience in Turkey was different from, let's say, Rob's, because I'm Muslim and because I'm African. So a lot of the times if I went into the stores and I presented as an American and I spoke English, the prices would go up for the things I would want to buy. But if I spoke in broken English and I identified as a Somali person, they would be more sympathetic and lower the prices and things like that, which was good because, yeah, I want to buy a scarf for 5 lira instead of 100. And also, I did get a lot of stares because I'm black, but it was more out of curiosity than racism. I felt more uncomfortable living in the U.S. than I have in Turkey, to be honest. Yeah, do you have any other a question or? that was basically my experience. I enjoyed it a lot. I love Turkey. I would go back 100 times. Turkish food is actually very similar to Somali food, but there's one food that I can't find it in Minnesota. It's called mandi. It's like dumplings. The best thing I've ever tried, ever. Do you have?
I ate a lot of baklava and a lot of Turkish delight.
In Germany, the kebab has replaced currywurst and other German dishes as popular among Germans. So Turkish food in Germany is very popular. I just want to say that the Turkish trip, though, it was a very diverse group, and there were 4 Somali American students, and her experience at the airport, it happened to 3 other students. The 4 Somali American students, not the other students, were stopped by the officers. But we had some students of Asian and Persian descent, and it's interesting. Unlike here, especially Minnesota Nice, didn't have that in Istanbul. I mean, the Turks would walk up and say, where are you from? And maybe the Chinese American students say, well, we're from the U.S. And the person, no, you're from China or something. I mean, just things that we necessarily wouldn't phrase that way. Or being a Somali student, that or a Somali American did not make sense. No, you're African. Why are you saying you're American? So that was interesting. But I guess, alas, the time has come. Thank you so much for spending time with us and extending your gaze beyond our shores. Hopefully we generated more light than heat, who knows? And so thank you for your questions.
Mary, do you want another t-shirt? Jasper, do you want another t-shirt? You want one? Your name again. Yeah. Pull another one. I can do one more. We've got 2 tonight, so. And, and Mike Reister. You always win. Where is he? Is he still here? Did he already leave? Oh. Oh, okay, pull one more. One more. Hurry up. Okay, and here's one I can't read. Berna Lundquist, is that right? Okay. Well, grab a t-shirt off the back table. Thanks, everyone. We start May next month with kind of a spring into summer is the theme. And so we'll start with our students, and then we go into gardening and some other fun stuff.